I was standing at the bar when I heard her say I would never really be family. Not in English. In French. The engagement party was perfect. The flowers were white and cream, arranged exactly the way Camille had suggested during one of those early planning calls where I learned to say, "That sounds beautiful," instead of offering my own ideas. The string quartet was playing something soft near the windows. 60 people I barely knew were holding champagne glasses and smiling at me like I'd done something remarkable just by getting Julian to propose. I had stepped away to give them space for photos. Julian and his mother posed together near the fireplace, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The photographer was repositioning them. I walked toward the bar, my dress brushing the polished floor, and that's when I heard it. Camille was standing 6 feet away with her sister Marguerite. She didn't look at me. She was speaking quickly in French. She assumed the noise of the party, and my complete ignorance of the language made her invisible. She was wrong about one of those things. Elle ne sera jamais vraiment de nôtres. She will never really be one of us. I kept my face completely still. I've spent 12 years as a certified French-English interpreter. I've translated custody hearings, medical emergencies, asylum cases. I can reconstruct speech in real time while a room is falling apart around me. A cocktail party is nothing. I heard her mention the prenuptial agreement, the family trust, the lawyer she'd already spoken to. And then, almost as an afterthought, she said something about the grandmother in Lyon. How she'd written again. How tiresome it was. How the P.O. box had been monitored for years to make sure nothing got through. I didn't react. I caught the bartender's eye. Ordered sparkling water with lemon. Lifted the glass toward Camille when she glanced over and gave her a small, warm smile. She smiled back. I walked back to Julian. He took my hand and squeezed it without looking away from the photographer. I heard every word. I want to tell you what I did with them, but first I need to tell you who I was before that night and why I almost did nothing at all. 3 months before the party, I was at Massachusetts General Hospital, standing beside a bed in the oncology wing, translating a diagnosis for a French-speaking patient who had just been told she had 6 months. The attending physician trusted me completely. He paused after every sentence. I repeated his words in French, precise and calm, while the woman's daughter held her hand and cried quietly into a tissue. When the meeting ended, I rode the T home. Changed out of my work clothes. Started dinner. That evening was the first time Camille ever mentioned my job in front of the extended family. We were at a dinner party at her home in Brookline. Aunts, uncles, cousins I was just starting to learn the names of. Someone asked what I did for work. I said I was an interpreter. Camille smiled. Oh, she does something with languages. Very sweet. Not quite a real career, but she enjoys it. Everyone nodded pleasantly. Julian looked at his plate. I redirected the conversation. Asked someone about their vacation. Smiled through the rest of the meal. That was the night I decided to stop mentioning my work around Camille. Not because I was ashamed of it, because I was still trying to make things easy. I'd been doing that my whole life. My parents died in a car accident when I was 9. I spent the rest of my childhood in foster care, bouncing between distant relatives and temporary placements, learning very quickly that the way you stayed somewhere was by being easy. Agreeable. Undemanding. The kind of kid people didn't mind keeping. By the time I met Julian at 32, I had a career I was proud of and an apartment I loved. But I still carried the belief that love was something you earned by being the least amount of trouble. So when Camille made a dismissive comment about my work, I didn't correct her. When she rearranged our engagement party without asking me, I said it sounded perfect. When she spoke to Julian about me like I wasn't in the room, I smiled and poured more wine. I told myself Camille just needed time. I was 34 years old, and I was still telling myself that patience was the same thing as being chosen. The engagement party started exactly on time. Julian gave a toast that made me cry. He talked about the night we met, about the way I listened when he talked about his architecture projects, about how he knew within a month that he wanted to marry me. His voice cracked a little at the end. People clapped. Then Camille stood. She was elegant, poised, She spoke about welcoming new chapters and our family growing. She used all the right words. But she never said my name in a way that suggested I actually belonged to anything. Elise, Julian's older sister, caught my eye from across the room and made a small face. The kind that says I noticed, but I'm not going to say anything. I smiled back. The photographer started arranging people for formal pictures. Camille, Julian, Elise, a few cousins. They repositioned near the fireplace. I stepped aside to give them space. That's when I walked toward the bar. Camille and Marguerite were already standing there. I didn't think anything of it. The bar was slightly removed from the crowd, quieter. Marguerite had stationed herself as Camille's companion for the evening, the way she always did at family events. I was 3 feet away when Camille started speaking. Quietly. Quickly. In French. Marguerite's face tightened slightly. Not in agreement. In discomfort. Camille kept talking. I stood there, champagne glass in hand, and listened to my future mother-in-law dismiss me as someone without lineage, without family standing, without anything that would qualify me as really one of us. I had no idea, as I walked toward the bar, that the next 4 minutes were going to give me back a decade of my life, and take something away I couldn't name yet. Let me tell you exactly what she said. Camille leaned in slightly toward Marguerite, and spoke in the particular tone people use when they think no one important is listening. Eleni sera jamais vraiment de notres. Pas de famille, pas de héritage. Rain. She will never really be one of us. No family, no inheritance. Nothing. Marguerite murmured something I couldn't quite catch. A question, maybe. Or an attempt to redirect. Camille continued. She mentioned the prenuptial agreement. Said she'd already consulted the family's lawyer. Said it was necessary to protect the trust from someone with no demonstrable assets. Someone who came from nowhere. Marguerite shifted her weight. She looked uncomfortable. But she didn't disagree. Then Camille's tone changed. Just slightly. From dismissive to irritated. Et cette grand-mère à lion, she said. And that grandmother in lion. My hand tightened on the glass. Elle a encore écrit. J'ai fait surveiller la boîte postale pendant de Annie's pour m'assurer que rien n'est passé. She wrote again. I've had the P.O. box monitored for years to make sure nothing gets through. Marguerite said something about the food. A clear attempt to change the subject. Camille dropped it. I ordered my sparkling water. Smiled in her direction. Walked back to Julian. On the drive home, Julian talked about who he wanted to call in the morning. His college roommate. A cousin in Montreal. His voice was warm and happy. I listened. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. When we got home, Julian fell asleep within minutes. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, reconstructing the conversation word by word. I wasn't confused about what I'd heard. I was deciding what to do with it. By 4 a.m, I had stopped asking myself if I'd heard it wrong. I started asking myself what it meant. Who was the grandmother in lion? Why would Camille have been intercepting her letters? And how long had this been happening? I lay there until almost 4 a.m, going over every word, and by the time I heard Julian's breathing change, I had stopped asking myself if I'd heard it wrong. I started asking myself what it meant. 2 days later, I was at my desk finishing a translation brief for a law firm when my phone buzzed. Camille. The text was breezy. Almost administrative. Hi Nora. We should get the paperwork sorted before the big day. I've spoken with our family attorney. He handles these things for us. Let me know when you're free to go over everything. XX. I read it twice. Then I took a screenshot. I opened a new document on my laptop and saved the image. Titled the file, Record. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't explaining her behavior to myself. I was documenting it. That evening, I met Priya for coffee. Priya and I had worked together for years. She was a fellow interpreter, sharp and plain-spoken, the kind of friend who didn't soften difficult truths just to make you feel better. I showed her the text. She read it once. Put the phone down. She doesn't think you're going to say anything, does she? It was the first time someone had said it out loud. I stared at my coffee. I haven't decided what to say yet. Nora. Priya leaned forward. She texted you about a prenup like it was already decided. Does Julian know? I'm working that out. Work faster. I didn't respond. Priya sighed. She knew me well enough to know that pushing wouldn't help. But her point had landed. Camille had moved the prenup from something I'd overheard at a party to something she was communicating directly. She wasn't hiding it. She simply didn't think I was in a position to object. And maybe until now I hadn't been. Priya put her coffee down and looked at me. She texted you about a prenup like it was already decided. Does Julian know? I said I was still working that out. Priya said I should probably work faster. 1 week later, Camille hosted a family dinner. Extended family this time. Aunts, cousins, and uncle visiting from Montreal. The dining room was full. The conversation loud and warm. Someone asked what everyone did for work. It was the kind of question that gets passed around a table like bread. When it came to me, Camille answered before I could. Oh, Nora does something with languages, she said, her tone light and warm. Very sweet. Not quite a real career, but she enjoys it. A few people nodded pleasantly. Julian looked at his plate. I smiled. Said something self-deprecating about freelance work being flexible. The conversation moved on. But I catalogued every detail of that moment. The angle of the light on the table. The cousin across from me nodding. Julian's silence. On the drive home, Julian said, "My mother means well." I didn't respond. It was the first time I hadn't immediately agreed. Julian glanced at me. She's just particular. She'll come around. I looked out the window. Said nothing. When we got home, I opened my laptop. Found a translation brief I'd completed the month before for the French consulate. A complex legal document. 40 pages. Referenced in a diplomatic proceeding. I read the first paragraph. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. He said she means well, and I didn't say anything. In 2 years, I had never not said something back. He didn't notice. But I did. 1 week after the dinner, I sat at my desk on a quiet Wednesday and opened a search window. I typed Colette Bissett Lyon, the name I'd reconstructed from Camille's remarks at the party. The search returned generic results. Historical records. Phone listings. Nothing specific. I called Priya. Can you help me find someone? A woman in Lyon. I have a name, a city, and a decade-old suspicion. Priya had contacts in French archival databases through our work. She said she'd look. Within a day, she sent me a link. A French-language genealogy forum. A post from 9 years earlier. The username C. Bissett, Lyon 2E Arrondissement. The message. Searching for information about a granddaughter placed in the American foster care system following a road accident, early 1990s. Granddaughter's surname, Bennett. Any information appreciated. I read it 3 times. Closed my laptop. Made tea I didn't drink. I sat with that information for 2 days. I didn't tell Julian. I just kept thinking about what it meant. Someone had been looking for me. Not vaguely. Not passively. Actively. Publicly. For 9 years. And I had never known. I had spent my entire adult life believing I had no family left. That I was alone. That the people who might have wanted me simply didn't exist. But she did exist. And she'd been looking. C. Bissett Lyon. Looking for any information about a granddaughter, American foster care, accident 1992, surname Bennett. I read it 4 times. Then I sat there for a long time and thought about what it means when someone has been looking for you for 9 years, and you never found out. I reached out to Elise 3 days later. Not confrontationally. Just a careful question. Do you remember anything from years ago about your mother asking someone to hold mail from a P.O. box in Lyon? Elise didn't respond right away. Then, can we meet for coffee? We met at a place near her office. Just the 2 of us. No Julian. Elise looked tired. She ordered tea. Stirred it for a long time before she spoke. I have a memory, she said quietly. I don't know if it's what you're looking for. Tell me. I was 27. I'd just moved into my own apartment, but I was home for the weekend. I overheard my mother talking to the housekeeper. She told her to hold anything that came to a P.O. box in Lyon. Set it aside without opening it. I didn't move. I thought it was strange, Elise continued. But I didn't ask. My mother manages a lot of things I've learned not to question. Do you remember when? She thought for a moment. 11 years ago. Maybe a little more. 11 years. Before I'd ever met Julian. Before I'd existed in Camille's life in any meaningful way. Elise. My voice was steady. Professional. That was before Julian and I were together. She looked at me. I know. We sat in silence for a while. Then Elise said very quietly, I should have asked. I drove home alone. Sat in the parking garage for a while before going upstairs. Julian was making dinner when I walked in. He told me about his day. I listened. I decided I was going to tell him, but I wanted one more piece of information first. Elise said, I was 27. I remember because I thought it was such a strange instruction. Hold anything from lying. I didn't ask. She looked at her coffee. I should have asked. I told Julian everything that night. We were sitting at the kitchen table. Dinner was finished. The dishes were still out. I told him what I'd overheard at the party. What I'd found about Colette. What Elise had confirmed. I told him clearly, without editorializing. The way I would present translated testimony in court. Julian listened. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'll talk to her. Julian, no, I will. Privately. Let me handle this. I looked at him. Okay. He seemed relieved. He called Camille that evening. Went into the other room. I could hear his voice but not his words. 45 minutes later, he came back. She's agreed to send the letters, he said. And the prenup conversation can wait until after the wedding. He squeezed my hand. I told you she'd come around. I said, yes. But that night I lay awake again. I thought about every foster placement where I'd stayed quiet and agreeable and easy to keep. I thought about how many of those placements had ended anyway. And I realized something. Waiting for Julian to fix this privately wasn't protection. It was the same self-erasure I'd practiced my whole life. Just in a different house. He said, I told you she'd come around. And I said, yes, and I meant it in the moment. But somewhere around 2 a.m, I started thinking about the 6 different families who had said some version of the same thing to me when I was small, and I stopped meaning it quite so much. A week later, a small parcel arrived. Julian brought it in with genuine warmth. She sent them. I opened it carefully. Letters. Bundled with white string. I read the dates. Then I cross-referenced them against Elise's timeline. 3 full years were missing. The years right after Colette's genealogy post. The years when she'd been searching most actively. I didn't say anything to Julian immediately. I called Elise. Can you check something for me? The years you remember. Would they match letters from 2012 to 2015? Elise was quiet. Then, yes. There should be more. I sat with the partial truth for 2 days. Then my phone rang. Camille. Nora, darling. I was hoping we could have lunch. Just the 2 of us. To clear the air before the wedding. Her voice was warm. Conciliatory. I said yes. I counted the dates twice. Then I counted them a 3rd time, because I'm a professional and I don't like making mistakes. The gap was real. 3 years gone. And then my phone rang and it was Camille, asking if I wanted to have lunch. The lunch was at a restaurant in Cambridge. Quiet. Expensive. The kind of place where difficult conversations happen under white tablecloths. Camille was warm. She smiled when I arrived. Ordered wine. I should have been clearer earlier, she said. About my reasons. I waited. Julian has always been sensitive, she continued. About anything that complicates family dynamics. I was only trying to make the transition easier for everyone. She called the letters a small thing that was handled poorly. She said the missing years might have been misfiled. She suggested that pressing further would make things uncomfortable for everyone, especially Julian, right before the wedding. I listened. I thanked her for lunch. I didn't agree to anything. I called Priya from the parking lot. Described the conversation verbatim. Priya said, she just tried to talk you out of the truth and called it kindness. I know. What are you going to do? I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, I'm going to bring Julian and Elise into the same room and say it once in front of everyone so she can't manage it separately afterward. Priya said she tried to talk you out of the truth and called it kindness. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what she does. And I've been letting her do it for 2 years. I asked Julian if we could have dinner with his family before the wedding. He thought it was a good idea. Clear the air, he said. Camille hosted. The table was set for 5. Me, Julian, Camille, Elise, and Marguerite, invited by Camille, I assumed because she thought an extra witness would stabilize things. Camille was gracious. She poured wine, asked about the wedding planning. I waited until everyone had finished their first course. Then I placed the partial set of letters on the table. I counted the dates, I said calmly. 3 years are missing. Camille's expression didn't change. These things happen in transit, Nora. Letters get lost. Elise, who had been quiet and tense throughout the meal, put her fork down. Mom! Her voice was steady. I need to say something. Camille looked at her daughter. 11 years ago, Elise said, I overheard you tell the housekeeper to hold anything from a P.O. box in Lyon. I remember the date because I'd just moved into my own apartment. It was before Julian and Nora had even met. The table went completely silent. Camille stared at Elise. Marguerite looked down. Julian looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he looked at me. Elise said the date. She said it clearly, not dramatically, the way you say something when you've been carrying it long enough that saying it out loud is actually a relief. And Camille looked at her own daughter and didn't say anything. That was the first time I had ever seen her not know what to say. After a long silence, Camille recovered. She looked around the table. Her voice was controlled, measured. I was only trying to protect this family, she said. Everything I have done has been for this family. I looked at her. I waited 1 beat. Then I responded. In French. Clearly. Without accent. The way I speak in courtrooms when precision matters more than volume. Je vous ai entendu, I said. I heard you. Camille's face went very still. À la fête de fiançailles. Vous parlez avec Marguerite. Vous avez dit que je serais jamais vraiment de votre. Vous avez parlé de l'accord prénuptial. De la grand-mère à Lyon. De la surveillance de la boîte postale. At the engagement party. You were talking with Marguerite. You said I would never really be one of you. You talked about the prenuptial agreement. About the grandmother in Lyon. About monitoring the P.O. box. Her composure cracked. Not dramatically. Not with anger or tears. But in the specific way of someone realizing the one thing they never thought to question was wrong from the very beginning. I leaned forward slightly. Vous avez décidé Illinois y longtemps que je n'aurais jamais de vraie famille. You decided a long time ago that I would never have real family. Vous vous êtes trompé 2 fois. You were wrong twice. Une fois sur ma grand-mère. Once about my grandmother. Et une fois sur moi. And once about me. Camille didn't speak. Julian looked at his mother for a long moment. Then he said quietly and clearly, I need to know where the rest of the letters are. Marguerite, who had been staring at the table, finally spoke. Camille, she said. Tell them. I said it in French. I said it clearly, without raising my voice, the way I have said 10,000 difficult things in 10,000 difficult rooms. And I watched her realize, for the first time, that she had been speaking to me in a language she thought I didn't know. That every word she had said in front of me, thinking she was safe, I had heard and remembered and was now handing back to her. After Marguerite's quiet command, a long silence hung over the table. Then Camille stood. She left the room without speaking. We waited. She returned a few minutes later carrying a second box. Smaller than the first. Also tied with white string. She set it on the table in front of me. She didn't say anything. She sat down. Elise leaned forward slightly. Looked at the string. Every year, she said quietly. The same knot. It wasn't a question. It was the recognition of something deliberate made visible in an object. Julian's voice was calm. Steady. Nora and I will handle the prenup discussion with our own attorney, he said. Camille didn't respond. The dinner ended without ceremony. No one said goodbye the way we usually did. Outside, Elise walked me to my car. We stood in the cold for a moment. I should have said something years ago, she said. I looked at her. You said it when it mattered. She hugged me. Not the polite kind. The other kind. Elise said she should have spoken sooner. I told her the truth. She said it when it counted. And then she did something that surprised me. She hugged me. Not a polite hug. The other kind. 3 days later, I sat at the kitchen table alone. Julian was out running errands. I opened the box. Read the letters in order. Earliest to most recent. The first ones were formal. Careful. A grandmother writing to a granddaughter she'd never met, not sure what to say. Dear Nora, my name is Colette Bissett. I am your father's mother. I have been searching for you for a very long time. As the years went on, the letters became more personal. She told me about Lion, about my father as a boy, about the small garden behind her apartment, about how she'd kept every return to sender notice, hoping one day something would change. The most recent letters were quieter. Someone who had been writing without receiving an answer for so long that hope had started to fade. I finished reading. Then I took out paper. Real paper. Not my laptop. And I started writing back. Julian came home while I was halfway through the first page. He saw the box. The letters spread across the table. He sat down across from me without asking questions. After a moment, he said, I want to tell you something about my mother. I looked up. She left Lion when she was 22, he said. She doesn't talk about it. But I know she came from nothing. Married into the Moreau family. Spent 40 years building a version of herself that no one questions. He showed me a photo on his phone. The family portrait at his parents' house. Look at the people in the picture, he said. No grandparents on her side. She's always avoided talking about her own family. I studied the image. I think, Julian said slowly, she was afraid you'd have what she worked her whole life to build. And she couldn't stand that. I thought about that for a long time. That doesn't make it okay, I said. No, Julian said. It doesn't. Julian said. She was afraid you'd have what she worked her whole life to build. I thought about that for a while. And then I went back to writing my letter. 6 months later. Our wedding was small. 40 people. A venue near Boston with tall windows and good light. Colette was on a laptop screen propped on a chair in the front row. She was 81. Dressed carefully. Smiling. When the officiant pronounced us married, she raised a small glass of wine and mouthed something I couldn't quite hear, but understood perfectly. I held her gaze for a moment. She'd waited a long time for this. The reception was warm. Informal. Elise made a short toast. Talked about honesty and family, and the people who choose to show up when it's hard. Camille was there. Quieter than before. More careful. She didn't perform warmth she didn't feel. But she also didn't try to manage the room the way she used to. At one point, Julian's cousin from Paris asked me about my work. Before I could answer, Camille, standing nearby, said, She's a certified interpreter. Legal, medical, diplomatic. It's a serious career. She didn't look at me when she said it. I didn't comment. I just answered the cousin's question myself. That night, back in our apartment, I sat at the kitchen table. Writing a letter to Colette. Not an important one. Just an ordinary update. About the wedding. About the weather. About the small framed print from Lion that hung on our wall. In the other room, I could hear Julian on the phone. His voice was warm. Patient. Gently firm. She's a certified interpreter, Maman. It's an impressive job. You should ask her about it sometime. I didn't look up. I kept writing. Outside, it was just starting to get dark. The box of letters sat open on the shelf behind me. Not evidence anymore. Just a box. The beginning of something that was finally simply mine. She spent years deciding I had no family worth claiming. She just never imagined I'd understand her well enough to prove her wrong in her own language.